Welcome to episode 90 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the tales of Troy and the story of the Death of Patroclus, Part 2. Toward evening, the Argives gained the advantage. They take possession of the corpse of Cebriones and stripped it of its armor. And now Patroclus fell on the Trojans with redoubled fury and slew 3 times 9 of them. But at his 4th onslaught, death lay in ambush, for Phoebus Apollo himself fought in this encounter. Patroclus did not observe him because he was wrapped in a heavy mist. But Apollo came up from behind and struck his back with the flat of his hand so that everything blurred before his eyes. Then the god knocked the helmet from his head, and it clattered to the ground and rolled under the hooves of the horses, so that the crest was soiled and draggled with dust and blood. And now he broke the lance in his hand, loosed the shield strap from his shoulder and the cuirass from his breast, and numbed his heart so that he stood motionless and staring. Then Euphorbus, son of Panthos, a brave warrior who had that day felled 20 Argives, pierced his back with a lance and returned to the ranks. But Hector, running forward, thrust his spear into the groin of the wounded hero, and the brazen point went clear through his body. Hector was vanquished, him as a lion downs the boar at the mountain spring to which both have come to quench their thirst. He seized the lance to wrench it from the flesh of Patroclus and cried jubilantly, "Patroclus, you are going to turn our city to a heap of ruins and carry our wives away on your ships to be slaves in your country. Now I have at least put off that evil day of servitude. As for you, the vultures will feast on your flesh. What does your friend Achilles avail you now?" Dying, Patroclus answered him, but his voice was faint. "Rejoice as much as you wish, Hector," he said. "Zeus and Apollo have granted you effortless triumph, for it was they who deprived me of my weapons. Had it not been for the gods, my lance would have tamed you and 20 more like you. In the face of the gods, it was Phoebus who struck me down in the face of men. Euphorbus, you may strip me of my armor, but one thing I predict, not for long will you go proudly on your way, for disaster lurks at your side, and I know by whose hand you will fall." When he had gasped out these words, the soul left his body and flew to the underworld. But Hector called after him, "Why predict my coming fate, Patroclus? Who knows but that Achilles himself may be first to be slain by my spear?" And with these words he dug his heel into the earth, pulled the brazen spear from the wound, and cast the dead man back on the ground. Then he turned his lance, dripping with Patroclus's blood, against Automedon his charioteer, but the immortal horses bore him out of danger. Next, Euphorbus of Troy and Menelaus, son of Atreus, fought for the body of Patroclus. "You shall atone," shouted the Trojans. "Atone for having slain Hyperenor, my brother, and widowed his wife." And he drove his lance at the shield of the son of Atreus, but the iron point bent double. Then Menelaus lifted his lance and thrust it deep into his enemy's throat, so that the point came out at the nape of his neck, and his black locks, adorned with gold and silver, streamed with blood. Down he sank, and his weapons clattered as they fell. Instantly Menelaus stripped him of his armor and would have borne it away had not Apollo envied him his spoils. Assuming the shape of Mentes, king of Cecones, he came to Hector and persuaded him leave off pursuing the immortal horses of Achilles, which Automedon was driving off, as spoils too difficult to attain, and go back to the body of Euphorbus. Hector turned and suddenly saw Menelaus bending over the bleeding corpse and taking the splendid armor. The son of Atreus heard the ringing cry of the Trojan hero and had to admit to himself that he could not withstand Hector dashing toward him with his battalions. Reluctantly he retreated, leaving the body and armor behind. But as he fled, he glanced back from time to time or paused to look for Ajax the Great. He finally found him to the left, where the tumult was thickest, and hurried toward him to ask his help in the struggle for the body of Patroclus. When the two drew near the place where the son of Menelaus had fallen, they saw that Hector had already taken the armor and was drawing the body toward him to hew the head from the shoulders and drag the trunk away as a feast for the dogs. But when he saw Ajax coming under cover of his shield of 7 ox hides, he gave up his prey and quickly fled to the ranks of his comrades. There he sprang into his chariot and handed the armor of Patroclus to friends who were to take it to Troy for him, to be preserved as a token of his glory. Meantime, Ajax stood guard over the body like a lion over its young, and by his side Menelaus kept watch. Glaucus, Lyceum, meanwhile, glowered at Hector and reproached him. "What avails your fame?" he said. "If you falter and flee from a hero, think now how to defend your city single-handed. No Lycian at any event will fight beside you from now on. For how can we expect you to aid a lesser man now that you have let Prince Sarpedon, your comrade in arms, to whom you were bound by ties of hospitality, lie unprotected, the prey of the Danai and the dogs? If the Trojans had our courage, we would soon have the body of Patroclus inside the walls of Troy, when the Argives would be ready enough to give us the corpse of Sarpedon, if only to get back the splendid armor." Glaucus said this, not knowing that Apollo had removed the body of Sarpedon from the hands of the Argives. "You are foolish, Glaucus," said Hector, "if you think I am afraid of powerful Ajax. Never yet have I shrunk from the fight, but the will of Zeus is mightier than all our power. Watch me now, though, and judge whether I am as timid as you have said." With these words, he raced after his friends, who were carrying toward the city the armor of Achilles, which Patroclus had worn. When he reached them, he exchanged his own cuirass for that of Achilles, and girt on the immortal armor the god themselves had given Peleus at his wedding, and with Thetis, goddess of the sea. When Peleus felt himself growing old, he had given it to his son, but he, alas, was not destined to grow old in it. The king of men and immortals looked down from the heights and saw Hector girding on the arms of godlike Achilles. Gravely, he shook his head and spoke in his heart's depth. "Unhappy Hector, you do not even dream that death already stalks at your side. You have slain the cherished friend of the hero before whom all others tremble. You have stripped his body, snatched the helmet from his head, and now you walk adorned with the immortal armor of the son of a goddess. But because you will never return from this counter, because Atramatke, your wife, will never greet you again, nor undo these splendid arms, I shall give you one last and glorious victory." When Zeus had ended, the cuirass clung closely about Hector. The spirit of Ares flamed within him, and his limbs swelled with strength and power. With a shout, he rejoined his allies and led them against the foe. The struggle for the body of Patroclus broke out afresh. So furious did Hector rage that Ajax said to Menelaus, "I am now less concerned for dead Patroclus, who will be food for the birds and dogs of Troy, than for our own heads. For Hector and his men surged about us like a cloud. Lift your voice and see if the heroes among the Danai will hear your cry." Menelaus called as loudly as he could, and the first to hear was Ajax of Locris, the swift son of Oileus. He ran to the spot, and after him came Idomeneus, with Meriones, his comrade in arms, and countless others, so that the corpse was again fenced about with shields of bronze. The Trojans pressed them as hard that the body was almost dragged from their midst, but at last Ajax the Great came to the rescue. As Hippothus The Pelasian, an ally of the Trojans, was tying the ankles of the body with a thong to pull it by. The son of Telamon hurled his spear through the round top of his helmet. It cracked, and brains and blood from the wound spattered the point. Hector aimed at Ajax, but hit Schedius, the Phoenician. Ajax countered and pierced the cuirass of Phorcus, son of Phaenops, who was fighting for the body of Hippothous, and the lance dug into his entrails. Now the Trojans, and even Hector himself, recoiled, and the Argives would have conquered against the decision of Zeus had not Apollo, in the guise of Periphas, the aged herald, goaded mighty Aeneas on to battle. Aeneas knew him for a god. He fired his men with ringing shouts and himself sprang forward in the lead. As the Trojans once more turned their faces to the foe, Aeneas slew Leocritus, friend of Lycomedes. He, in turn, avenged the death of his comrade by killing Aposeon of Paeonia. And now the Argives again held out their lances to ward their adversaries from the body of Patroclus. In other parts of the field, too, the fighting went on even more furiously until the sweat poured from the struggling warriors. Rather shall the earth swallow us, called the Danai, than that we leave this body to the Trojans and return to our ships without having won glory. Even if we die to the last man, the Trojans roared on their side, let no one hang back. While they were fighting, the immortal horses of Achilles stood apart. When they heard that Patroclus, their charioteer, had died at Hector's hands, they began to weep, as men do. In vain did Automedon try to urge them on, now with the goad, now with caressing words, and now with threats. They refused to stir either toward the ships or to the battling Argives. Motionless as a monument on the Mount of the Dead, they stood before the chariot and hung their heads to the ground. Soiled with dust, their manes streamed thick and curling beneath the ring and the yoke, and hot tears dropped from their eyes. Even Zeus, gazing down from above, could not but feel pity for them. Poor creatures, he said to himself, why did we give you eternal young and immortal to mortal Peleus, that you too might suffer sorrow like luckless men? For of all that breathes and moves on earth, there is nothing more wretched than man. And as for Hector, vain in his hope of taming you and yoking you to his chariot, I shall never permit it. Is it not enough that he vaunts his ownership of the armor of Achilles? And Zeus filled the horses with courage and strength. At once they shook the dust from their manes, and quickly drew the chariot into the throng of Trojans and Achaeans. But Automedon, alone in the chariot, could not guide the horses, and hurl his lance at the foes as well. While he was still in this predicament, his friend Alcimedon, son of Larissus, caught sight of him, and was astonished that he should expose himself in this way without a charioteer. Who, except Patroclus, was ever your equal in bridling horses? Automedon called to him. If you will take the reins and the goad, I can leave the horses to you and use my strength for fighting. When Automedon gave his place to another, Hector observed it and said to Aeneas beside him, Look over there. The horses of Achilles are rushing into battle with an inexperienced charioteer. Are you willing to tackle those two with me? The spoils are well worth the trouble. Aeneas nodded assent, and both stormed forward under the shields with Chromius and Artis following them. But Automedon prayed to Zeus, and the cloud-gatherer filled his heart with unwonted strength. Drive close behind me, Alcimedon, he cried, and then, Here, Ajax, here, Menelaus, leave the dead to the other offenders and keep us the living from destruction. Hector is bearing down on us. Hector and Aeneas, the two bravest heroes of Troy. With this, he swung his lance at Aretus, and it pierced his entrails. Caught in full advance, the hero fell backward into the dust. Then Hector hurled his spear at Automedon, but it flew over his head and stood with quivering shaft fixed in the ground. And now they would have used their swords against each other had not the two Ajaxes come between them and turned the Trojans back to the body of Patroclus. There the battle raged most hotly. Zeus was now of another mind. Hid in a dark cloud, he set Athene as his messenger down to earth, where she appeared in the semblance of aged Phoenix, and went up to Menelaus. Seeing the old man, he said, "Oh, Phoenix, if only Athene would give me strength today, so that I might avenge my slain friend. For I understand their reproach in your eyes." The goddess rejoiced that, unknowing he had sought her aid, poured strength into his shoulders and knees, and in his heart she put defiance and steadfastness. Brandishing his lance, he ran to the body, and as Hector's friend Potus, son of Aetion, turned to flee from him, the spear of Atreus' son struck him under the belt, so that he crashed to the earth. Now Apollo, in the shape of Phinops, approached Hector and taunted him. "Who among the Danai will fear you if Menelaus can frighten you away? He slew your most cherished friend, and now he, the least manly of the Argives, will deprive you of the body of Patroclus as well." These words bowed Hector's heart with dark grief, and he dashed forward again, shining in his brazen armor. Then Zeus shook his Aegeus, veiled Mount Ida and cloud, and with lightning and thunder crowned the Trojans' victory. Menelaus of Boeotia, whose shoulder Polydamas had grazed with his spear, was the first to turn and flee. Lycius was rendered unfit for the fight by Hector, who pierced his hand at the knuckles. Idomeneus, who had just come from the ships on foot, missed Hector when he hurled his spear, and Hector missed him with his countercast, but shattered the ear and cheek of Coriolanus, who, fortunately for Idomeneus, had preceded him with Meriones in his chariot. The spear knocked out his teeth, cut his tongue, and the hero fell. Meriones gathered the rain up from the dust and gave them to Idomeneus, who quickly swung himself into the chariot and drove the horses back to the ships. When Ajax saw this, he lamented so loudly to Menelaus, who fought beside him, that Zeus had pity on him, scattered the clouds, and shed full sunlight over the battlefield. "Menelaus," said Ajax, "try to find Anticlus, son of Nestor. See if he is still alive. He would be a fitting messenger to tell Achilles that Patroclus, his dearest friend, is dead." With watchful eyes, like an eagle who peers for the hare flat against the earth against bushes, Menelaus went about and soon saw Nestor's son to the left of the field. "Have you not heard, Anticlus?" he called to him, "that a god has given victory to the Trojans and disaster to the Danai? Patroclus has fallen, and all the Argives feel the loss of that dauntless hero. Only one lives who is braver, Achilles. Go quickly to his house, bring him the sorrowful news, and summon him to rescue the corpse which Hector has stripped of its armor." A shudder ran through the youth. His eyes filled with tears when he heard these words. For a long time he was speechless. Then he gave his armor to Laodocus, his charioteer, and ran toward the ships on flying feet. When Menelaus had again reached the body, he and Ajax took counsel on how they could bear away their slain friend, for they did not expect too much of Achilles, even if he could be prevailed on to come, since he no longer had the armor of the immortals. With a mighty straining of muscles, they lifted the body from the earth, and though the Trojans burst into shouts of rage and followed with brandished swords and spears, Ajax had only to turn, and they paled and dared and not contest his burden. Thus they bore the body from the field and toward the ships, and with them the rest of the Argives fled from battle. Hector and Aeneas were close on their heels, and here and there one of the fleeing dropped a shield or a lance as he retreated across the trench in frantic haste and confusion. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.